Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another interview special with am I going to call you brilliant? Or am I going to call your podcast brilliant, George? Or both? With
Both.
with the brilliant George Elek from the brilliant Not the Top 20 podcast. How you doing, matey?
Very good, mate. How you doing?
Yeah. All good. Just bearing up,
Good.
getting to the end of the international break. Let's start at the top of the Championship. Coventry City scored 40 points in the last 20 games of last season, which is the fabled 2 points per game. They're over that this season. They've got 19 from 9. Can they do it for another 37 games? And will that be enough?
I think they are the most likely winners of the Championship at this point. I think that's pretty obvious now. I mean, you're factoring, when you're looking at who are the nearest challengers, I think if you're going to look at Ipswich, you've got to assume there's going to be massive improvement. Right now, Coventry look to me to be the best team in the league by a distance. And that's reflected, I think, in the fact they're top of the league, but also their goal difference through 9 games is plus 20. Like, this is a team, and that's indicative of a side that when they're at it and when they're good, as a few teams have found out, they can totally blitz you. And there have been games this season where they probably should have done, Norwich in particular, where they drew 1-1, where that was a game where they easily could have won 4 or 5-0. So, we're coming up to a year since Frank Lampard was appointed Coventry manager, or it might be a year basically this weekend, I think. And
late November, yeah, you're very.
Yeah. So it's coming up to a
George,
year.
I think there was a couple of tricky fixtures and they delayed it so he'd get a nice start if memory serves.
Clever. He's always been the clever footballer, hasn't he? But it's and there was a lot of myself included, confusion, I guess. 20th of November, around disagreement as to whether it was a suitable fit. But what an appointment this has been, to replace someone in Mark Robins who has surely done the best job of any EFL manager over the previous 7 or 8 seasons, and to bring in someone whose managerial career was slightly hanging by a thread after the Everton job and a couple of jobs at Chelsea. To bring him in was a big move, and it's been incredible. Joe Edwards by his side, who of course had an ill-fated spell in charge of Millwall. I don't think you can underestimate how big a role he plays. I think there is a reason why Frank Lampard with Jody Morris by his side, his teams look very different to Frank Lampard with Joe Edwards by his side. We're seeing, even though Coventry is still a front-footed approach team, under Morris it was just relentless pressing, and now we see Coventry, I think, as a much more well-rounded team who press when they have to, but also are happy to sometimes sit back and attack in transition, which suits the attacking players that they've got in the likes of Sakamoto and Efren Clark and Thomas Asante and Wright, who are so effective at eating up space in behind. So that's a very long way of me saying, I think they might be the real deal. And people sometimes don't like it when you say this because they don't know what it means, but I don't think this is a great iteration of the Championship. I think this is, normally we have parachute payment teams who just look well clear of the rest. It isn't the case this time around. And that opens the door for the likes of Coventry to, a side that maybe would be competing with those teams at the top end in a normal season, to actually just go forward and really grab it by the scruff of the neck and try and win the league.
Yeah, it moves the goalpost, doesn't it? Normally we're saying, you might have a chance in the playoffs to the non-parachute teams. But yeah, you're right. Perhaps now it might be without like the Ipswich unicorn season, or I don't know, a Norwich under Daniel Farker kind of coming from nowhere. Just quickly on Lampard to round out Coventry, George. Are we finally at the point where we can have a sensible conversation about the bloke? Because for years, just people have been very triggered and very emotional about the fact that this world-class footballer is not a world-class manager and he's managing in the Championship. And I found it tricky. I guess the more body of work he has in the EFL, but I don't know. I think people are still a bit blinded by the lights. And as you say, he's a good manager and done really well any time he's been in the EFL, hasn't he?
Yeah. And it's funny because as football fans, we're incredibly forgiving of young players for the most part. Like, we all understand if you bring a 19-year-old, 20-year-old in, who's very talented, they're going to have games where they're not up to it, and we will accept that because we understand youth development. Whereas with managers, we're unbelievably unforgiving. Like, it's crazy.
Preach.
You can have a young manager who's never managed before, And if they go through a run of a
Look
poor
at
run,
Joe
they're
Edwards,
terrible.
who you mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And there'll be, Millwall fans who'll tell you still now that he's useless. And it's the same even with managers who do incredibly well, have a really big body of work that's really successful, and they have one bad spell. It was kind of the same, like people were writing off Rob Edwards off the back of last season at Luton. And, when he's appointed borough manager, people are like, how has he got a job at the top end of the Championship when he's just nearly, played a part in getting a team relegated? Well, because it's not, there's nuance to this, and a managerial ability isn't, it's not a computer game where it gets defined by a number. And I think Lampard has clearly learnt a lot from the successes of the past. It's easy to forget that Derby team that he managed with that just ridiculously high intensity football, albeit blessed with a couple of quite good players on loan from Chelsea. They were a good team, and they beat one of the best championship teams of all time.
Really hard championship that year.
Really
as well,
tough,
wasn't it?
exactly. Yeah, really tough. Think of the teams that have had to get past in order to get up. So I agree. I think, as I say, I do think there's more to. There are certain managers who probably lean on their assistants more than others. We've seen that, for example, if you look at Steven Gerrard, bring Gerrard up in the same conversation as Lampard. His managerial career has been quite defined by who's been next to him. And I think Lampard's another one where it wouldn't surprise me if Lampard is massive in terms of managing the culture, of keeping standards incredibly high, but he might not do as much of the on the grass stuff. I'm sure he does a lot of it, but might not do as much as other managers. And that's why his right man is going to be incredibly important. And that's why maybe with Edwards there rather than Morris, it looks a bit different and it's maybe more effective.
Yeah, amen. We got some surprises, 4th, 5th and 6th. Who do you think finishes highest out of Preston, Stoke and QPR?
I think probably Stoke. I've been really impressed with all three, and I think the way that QPR bounced back from their humbling defeat against Coventry has been incredibly impressive, especially for a manager in Julian Stephan who hasn't managed in the league before, who's going to come under immense pressure early on after a defeat like that for them to rally. And the signing of Richard Kone has been inspired, and I'm still kind of struggling to understand why they were able to pick him up for the kind of smaller fee than was being touted around in January, and why other clubs weren't in for him. But in Preston's case, I think Hecky's done an amazing job there, and I think the recruitment in the summer looks really, really smart now. Like a couple of very good young loanees who've come in and immediately kind of raised the level. And the home form in particular looks really strong. But I do, always say on our pod to fans of clubs like this, like you cannot now judge Heckingbottom and judge Stefan by their start, right? If you're suddenly 12th in January, it's not like, we've blown it, like, sack the manager again. Like you've got to, you can't be the victim of your own success. And that's exactly what so far Heckingbottom and Stefan have done. I think with Stoke, it's maybe a bit different. Like we're used to Stoke being the perennial underachievers. We're used to them not being able to make it work with a talented squad of players. But when you look at squad investment and you look at squad talent, this is a Stoke side that probably should be in the conversation to finish in the top 6, even if they weren't expected to before the season started. I think in Million Manhoof, they've got one of the kind of under the radar best attacking players in the league, who's having a bit of a breakout season so far. In Mabama, they've got a player who looks just a brilliant loan pickup, leads the line really effectively, a goal threat too. And they've got Mark Robbins, who, as I said, things obviously tailed a little bit at Coventry last season, albeit the underlying numbers remained pretty good during that bad spell. And he's someone who's delivered immense success in trying circumstances at Coventry. Like he's never had the resource and the support that he's got now at Stoke, where under the Coates family, if he does a good job, he'll be supported to go and deliver with a lot of. It's a settled club, despite the managerial churn that they generally get through. That's due to on-performance issues rather than off-field issues. So, obviously the Doug King takeover went through at Coventry before Robbins left, but all of his success there was done in really, really trying off-field circumstances. So, I think they look like the most likely of the three to maintain this and be a playoff challenger. But I'm not writing off the other two as well, because as you and I know, Ben, you don't want to be at this stage telling fans they're not going to succeed because the comments are nasty.
No, I'm going to ask you about trolls and football fans later on, but yeah, great. Amen. You already mentioned the parachute teams. I was going to try and find you a nice statistic to say how much worse they were this year than last. And then I remembered Luton kind of ruined that for everybody with their imperfect storm season, didn't they? Why have the parachute teams started so badly? Are we just at a point now where the understanding of the rest of the teams on just how this hierarchy, distorted as it is, kind of works, and they're better prepped? Just too much churn now at the clubs? Is it just not going to be the same every season? Is it just a bit of diversity?
I don't really know. I mean, Leicester are obviously a bit of a separate case. It's kind of strange that they're, well, maybe it's not strange. Maybe it makes sense that they're the ones who are doing best so far, because there wasn't massive churn.
Do you think they're that great to watch yet, George?
No, not at all. Albeit I was really impressed with them in the win over Birmingham, but that was at a time where I
good
thought
wingers,
Birmingham
good defence, yeah?
Were very, exactly. And relying on the individual quality of players isn't necessarily always a sustainable way to success. But in the Championship, I think it's different, where often the players you're relying on are like elite players, right? They're players who can go on to be playing starting Champions League in like 2 years' time. In League Two, if you're relying on a really good player, on if you look at someone like Molineux at Doncaster, for example, what is his ceiling? Well, it's probably still League One. Like, he's not going to go on and be an elite footballer. Whereas in the Championship, you get players who are just playing at the wrong level. And like in Fatawu, Leicester have that, right? They've got a player who is destined to have a long career at the top level, and he probably shouldn't be playing in the Championship this season. Jordan James is another one, like one of their only signings in the window, who I believe is definitely destined to be a Premier League footballer, or a top tier footballer in time. And then even player like Mavridi's in and out of the side. Monga's one of the most exciting young talents in English football. They didn't do much in the window, and we're still awaiting to find out if they're going to have a points deduction. And it's not Maresca ball. It's not that kind of innovative style that we saw from them a couple of seasons ago. But the personnel is still there, and they still are able in moments to produce the magic needed to win games. And that's what's been lacking so far from Saints and Ipswich, where Southampton in particular really look to be missing their kind of star players to step up and produce that quality. Adam Armstrong has scored goals in times. Tom Fellows is a player that I really like, but he's yet to really kind of perform yet. And again, comparing him to someone like Fatawu, you're probably looking at him as being at the moment kind of a level below.
Good point.
And Ipswich, it's improving for sure. And we've seen Philogene in particular show his elite quality. He's another player that probably shouldn't be playing in the Championship this season. But unlike the previous Ipswich team that we saw under Kieran McKenna with the back-to-back promotions, which felt like an incredibly well-oiled, cohesive unit, they don't at all. It's similar to Leicester. The games that they win have been thanks to moments from star players producing, rather than just relentless chance creation and preventing the opposition from getting into it. So I'm not overly sold on any of them, really. Like, I still think Ipswich are the ones that have the highest ceiling. And it wouldn't surprise me if we saw a bit of a drop-off from Leicester, because the underlying numbers are, as we mentioned, not great, because Fatawu banging at top left from 25 yards isn't a particularly, good goal-scoring opportunity. But it just feels really open. Like, again, it wouldn't be a massive surprise if all three improve and they end up finishing as three of the top 4 or 5, as is normally the case. But yeah, there's nothing to fear, I think, in those teams for anyone in the league. Would you be shocked massively if Charlton managed to finish higher than both Birmingham and Wrexham? It's definitely not Wrexham. Birmingham's such a funny one, because I was really sceptical all summer. I was really sceptical last season, even when they set the League One points record, about whether or not this was just a good team in a bad league or just a brilliant team. And then I got completely carried away with it. But I don't know. I watched opening day against Ipswich. They were excellent. Should have beaten them. Yeah, I was at that game. Yeah. Yeah, and they were it felt a little bit like, I remember when the first, not quite to the same extent, just to be clear, but the first time you saw Bielsa's Leeds, you're like, wow, okay. First time seeing Company's Burnley against Huddersfield on opening day, a proper statement performance, where they just looked way better than the opposition, who had just been relegated and had finished second in the league the season before. And then I watched that midweek, I watched the Carabao Cup game against Sheffield United, where again, they just absolutely dominated that game. I guess what we weren't to know at that point was that both Blades and Ipswich were not in a good moment, and maybe that had something to do with it. But I have been surprised by how quickly Birmingham's sparkle seems to have worn off. And I think Chris Davis has to find a way to get it back quite soon, or he's going to come under immense pressure, because the ambition of the owners at Birmingham City and the level of investment means that they're not going to be interested in a season of mediocrity, let alone looking behind them. With Wrexham, obviously amazing achievement from Parky last season to get them promoted again, and 3 back-to-back promotions is some achievement. His record at the Championship level isn't good. I think some of the recruitment doesn't, some of it looks very good, like Moore and Broadhead, who combined on Monday night for a Wales goal against Belgium. Really smart. They've looked really good going forward. O'Brien, brilliant.
Kabore?
Yeah, he looks really, really great. But these are all really good attacking enforcements. I think Hyam is the one that I really like at the back, who should shore them up. I don't like the Cody signing at all. I think signing a player who at that age who is a distributor who has to play in a certain position against a side who are going to come under
poor fella in that foot race against Burrell.
Yeah, that was incredible.
That wasn't fair, was it?
But it's kind of surprised me to see how high I thought Parky would sit really deep this season, but they seem to really step up, and they don't have the defenders on the turn to really do that.
No.
I think that their late window business should mean they're okay, but as an Oxford fan looking for teams that I'm hoping are going to be down there, I think in terms of pure, obviously they should be nowhere near it based on the squad they've got, but in terms of pure performance, I think Wrexham have to be seen as one of the poorest 6 teams in the league so far this season. But as I say, I think you can probably factor them in for an improvement.
Just a quick word on Charlton then?
Yeah, really impressed. I mean, I think when Nathan Jones gets buy-in from everybody, then good things happen, basically. And it took a while, but they're clearly they're a side whose performance level is generally rock solid. They're not a team that throw in many poor performances. They are really, really resolute at the back. I've been impressed by how a couple of players have stepped up, in particular Lloyd Jones, at 30 playing at this level for the first time. Isn't somebody that I necessarily saw as being better than a very good League One centre-back, but he's been magnificent this season. And even signings they've made coming in, Apter, another one who maybe, I think Blackpool fans have been frustrated, so they never really saw the best of him at League One level, and yet he stepped up to the Championship impressively too. So they are, they're look a rock solid one to me. But I'd struggle to see them going much beyond mid-table. But as we say, maybe this is the year where, because it feels very congested in terms of quality within the league, if there is going to be a shock. And we've seen, Sunderland won the League One playoff final and did very well the season after. So no reason why Charlton can't too. No,
quite. I've got 2 other things. I've got Liam Manning and I've got Oxford, which kind of links together tenuously for a cup of tea there in...
I'm going to get my inflatable snake from next door.
In League One. I think there's a few Norwich fans who would quite like to deflate that inflatable snake. I really like Liam Manning. And I get why the Norwich fans are struggling a little bit to cope with being in the Championship and not being very good, because normally when they're in the Championship, they're winning it, or they're challenging, or they have brilliant players to sell, or they have brilliant young players coming through, etc., etc. But are Norwich on... I mean, is it as bad as the Norwich fans are making out? Are they on a historical low point now compared to, going all the way back to Lambert and Houlihan and Holt? Are they kind of at their lowest point there? And can Liam Manning ensure that it doesn't go any lower?
I think the lowest point was when they were beat, 7-1 by Colchester on opening day in League One, and then they decided to sack Brian Gunn and bring in Lambert, and the rest is history. Yeah,
Lambert was busy in the boardroom that day, apparently, wasn't he?
Yeah. My mythical worst 6 teams in the league so far, Norwich are definitely in it. Like they shouldn't be. Like you look at certainly when you got Josh Sargent leading the line, like there's no reason, they've got no business being one of the poorest teams in the league. I do think that the recruitment, which looked on paper quite exciting, and Ben Napper was getting a lot of plaudits over the course of the summer, it hasn't aged particularly well. over the last couple of windows, really. Topic in particular looks, not great, I wouldn't say. There's a couple of others who Medic as well at the back. He's made a couple of mistakes.
It's expensive, exactly. Wasn't he? Yeah.
Like there's a few. With Manning, I'm so torn because I loved his MK side a lot. I was really excited when Oxford brought him in. Obviously did an unbelievable job with us over a very short period of time, delivering us safety at a pretty precocious moment. At a pretty tough moment down the bottom end of League One, and then took us, into the promotion area before jumping ship. And then at Bristol City, obviously did an amazing job taking them to the playoffs for the first time in however long. Now, the only thing, and I love looking at underlying numbers and data to inform decisions. With Manning, I kind of ignored it because there's so much success there. If you take out that really bad run at MK Dons, where even there, the underlying numbers were
he had all his best players sold as well, George.
Exactly, and the numbers were okay. And I remember Liam Sweeting, the director of football, giving an interview being like, I really didn't want to do this. Like, I think there's loads of evidence to say this is the wrong decision. And when you look at what's happened to MK Dons since, it would have been interesting to see what had happened had they retained the faith in Liam Manning when you consider their trajectories since parting ways. But the underlying numbers at Oxford weren't great. And I remember saying at the time, like, if you're Liam Manning and you had an amazing first season at MK Dons and you probably turned down approaches from elsewhere, and then 3 months later you're sent packing, when you're Oxford manager and you have them high in the league and the underlying numbers aren't great, you're going to take whatever you've got to take your chance, because you never know when, he's experienced being shoved out the door off the back of some success in the past. But then at Bristol City last season, again, the underlying numbers were nowhere near as good as the top six. And Napper, the Norwich director of football, is clearly very data-led. So it's interesting that he's gone out and appointed a guy who's, if you're looking at kind of the numbers to support the achievements, they don't really exist. Like, both times there was a massive overachievement. And what we might be witnessing here is an element of variance where finally it's kind of catching up with him. And you can only outperform the XG for so long, and maybe that's the sting at the end of the tail here. I don't think he's got that long. I wouldn't have thought, because when you consider as well that the last two, if you look at the last two Norwich seasons, basically since Ben Napper came in, David Wagner delivered them into the top six. They're in the playoffs, and he was sacked.
It's probably the worst thing that could have happened, that, wasn't it?
Yeah,
could have
exactly.
Just done with being in the middle and starting transitioning then.
Yeah, and then Johannes Thorup sacked last season when kind of flirting with the playoffs, then falling out of contention, sacked. So when you've suddenly got Liam Manning delivering like relegation threatened football by any measure, by whether it's underlying numbers or the points tally at the moment, and on the eye test, surely there comes a moment where it's both manager and director of football who are going to come under heavy scrutiny when you consider the decline of the club at the moment.
Yeah. I know who normally wins the battle between manager and director of football.
Yeah.
Sadly for Liam Manning. Just quickly on Oxford, George, I suppose you're probably quite concerned this season, because it felt like last season Oxford, they had to be a bit like sort of Indiana Jones or something, where they had to get themselves right into peril to then pull the hat out from under the spikes or whatever. And they were either absolutely terrible for 14 games and then a playoff team, and then best team in the league when Rowett arrived, and then terrible again. What's your take this season? It looks concerning, especially, you made a really good point. With relegation battles, you have to say, well, who finishes lower then? And we all assume Sheffield United will not remain in 24th place.
Yeah, I definitely assume that. They're the ones. I'm more concerned about Norwich than Sheffield United out of the kind of the troubled giants, let's say. And Sheffield Wednesday, who knows? Like, I think they've looked probably better on the pitch
Agree.
than I thought they would do. But obviously, it's all going to be decided by off-field issues. And it's getting to the stage where it feels like administration is the best case scenario, and that basically comes with guaranteed relegation. So let's hope that's not the case. Of course, let's hope there is a buyer found very soon. With Oxford, I was at the game home against Coventry. Must have been beginning of September, end of August, beginning of September, I think. And at half time, and we were 2-1 down, and we've been so poor all season, I was really concerned. And then we battered them second half. We drew 2-2. We had chances to win the game. We then were really good against Leicester in a game that we drew 2-2 despite being ahead against 10 men. Their individual quality told late on, and went to Bristol City and beat them 3-1. And suddenly I was really positive. And then an easy running game came along, and we laboured to a 0-0 draw against QPR, beaten last time out. It's been a bit of a trend under Rowett where we seem to struggle against the perceived poorer teams, but kind of against better teams step up. And I think that part of that might be because in games where teams kind of really throw everything at us, we have that's where our threat from open play can actually be shown, where we've got really good willing runners, especially, Shemi Plaheta out wide is going to frustrate fans of every club that he ever plays for, but there's no denying his incredible pace and his ability to get teams on the front foot. Will Lancashire leads the line incredibly well. So I'm kind of a bit lost right now. I think we've shown against better opposition a quality and a performance level that means we definitely have the ability to be okay. But we haven't taken opportunities against some of the poorer teams, and it's a pretty unforgiving league where you're looking for the easy games and they don't really exist. So, my opinion will never change unless something fundamentally shifts at the football club, namely moving into a new stadium, hopefully quite soon. Is that if whoever is our manager can keep us up on the last day of the season on goal difference, then well done them, because right now we have one of the lowest budgets in the league. We have a revenue stream that is capped by the fact that we don't own our own stadium. We're massively overperforming by being where we are. And this season's no different.
Right, let's round it out, George. Let's talk a bit about broadcasting and podcasting and whatnot. Can you talk to me about the tension? Because I get this, deep versus wide, where some people are like, oh yeah, but Ben, you don't watch every single minute of every single one of our games, so who the hell are you to talk about it? And then I kind of say, well, you're incredibly emotionally invested and probably aren't regulating those emotions very well, so maybe I am quite a good person to talk about it. But yeah. I mean, multiply what I do by 3 because you do the entire EFL. How do you tread that line that I have to as well between going in depth or being broad and wide?
Yeah, I think it's tough. Like the way that we always see it on the pod is basically if someone's listening to us on a Monday because they want to catch up with the football, we need to tell them the stuff that happened in the game, right? So we need to describe the best goals or the most interesting moments, and but also not try and pretend that we're watching every single minute of every single game, because there's no point in doing that, and accept that sometimes we're going to get stuff wrong. But also, as you say, it's match analysis and then it's trends, I think, is the important thing. And as someone who observes as much football as he possibly can, who pores over the data as like a day job, or and looks at numbers to understand what's going on, a combination of the eyes plus that work and research that goes in can give you a pretty good look at what's going on. And I always say to people, there are professional gamblers out there who bet on football and make money on football who don't watch football, right? So they're able to do that. They're able to beat the market purely based on understanding how to quantify data. And I'm not saying that I'm like that at all, but that just goes to show that the whole well, you haven't watched us, you have no idea thing. Almost the biggest, promoter of bias are your eyes, where
right, yeah,
for so many different reasons, and there's obviously the inherent bias that goes into the teams that we support. Like I said earlier, I pore over the data. I use, especially with managers, use underlying numbers a lot to kind of validate my opinions. But when Liam Manning was Oxford manager and our numbers were poor, I was like, nah, it's fine, ignore it, because we're fans and you don't want to hear stuff that...
George, I spent the entire week leading up to the East Anglian derby saying Ipswich had to keep a clean sheet and be 2 goals up to possibly win the game, which is just my coping mechanism, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an Ipswich fan, like yourself, yesterday, and it's like, well, we've been bad so far, but it's we're going to get better. And it's like, why? What's that?
Because it will make me feel nice.
Yeah, exactly. And we do this. We do a survey at the beginning for NTT20.com. We do a survey every summer asking fans where they think their team's going to finish. And even the most negative fan will say 15th. Like we're terrible. The manager's rubbish. The recruitment's been terrible. I'm really negative, mid-table. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's your team's.
I do, George. I do that before I do my 1 to 24, and then I use it in the intro, and I say 75% of fans think their team will finish in the top 30% of positions. Just quickly do that maths and understand why I'm not going to read the comments. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And there is, and it's, you and I both have the same thing where like it's difficult to provide balanced coverage of these leagues because in order to do so, you have to be negative about teams, right? And there is
free going down, mate.
Exactly. But even, the thing that I've toyed with stopping doing it because it's just so tiresome, but it's important, I think, not to, because you've got to, you live and die by the quality of your content and the quality of your analysis, basically. But like the worst is when you look at a game and like you sit down on a Monday morning and you're like, right, I'm going to go through all of this. And you look at a 1-0 like away win and you're like, oh no, they've scored one of their 2 shots. It was a deflected effort from 35 yards and the opposition have absolutely battered them. Because that the fan of that, say an away fan goes to that game and they're in the away end, they leave absolutely buzzing. They don't care that they've nicked it. They leave being like the grit and the determination of our defence, like the mentality to get through it. And that might be true, but at the same time, you have to be like, yeah, this isn't
3 words, George: like, smash and grab.
Yeah, and you have to be like, I'm not overly, I'm not getting carried away by this. And then you get people in the comments being like, I can't believe I tuned in to hear you. Like, if you were there, you'd have seen like the grit and the determination. Yeah, that's fine, but they're all the intangibles that you just can't comment on unless you are there. And it doesn't mean that the other stuff is wrong. So it's a fine line to tread, isn't it? But for the most part, it's interesting because obviously, with NTT20, we're relatively new to the YouTube game, whereas it's your bag, and it's mad going from being a podcast that Spotify now obviously have comments, but it's not a big thing. Where for the most part, if someone wanted to argue with us, they'd have to go onto Twitter, find us, tag us, and tweet us. Whereas now it's just like as soon as it goes out, you just get the vitriol. But thankfully, I think we've got thick enough skin to deal with it. I mean, how do you find it?
Oh, mate, it's difficult. I don't have thick skin at all. I go through phases of not reading it. I go through phases of, if I'm good in my life, I've had enough sleep, my daughter's happy, I can cope with it. But sometimes if I just get there, and I'll be honest, sometimes it's when people... Sometimes when people are telling the truth, it really cuts to the quick because... if people are just being outright unreasonable, it's just a bit absurd, isn't it? But yeah, sometimes people can be very unkind, let's just say. But I don't want to world's smallest violin. I'm sure you agree, George. We have a great opportunity and, it's really, really fun. It's
for sure. Yeah. Definitely not like no complaints at all. And also it does make me a bit sad that sometimes the idea of, someone's team's won on Saturday, they've left work, they've seen the pods out, they're like, yes, I can listen to it. And then they're like, oh no, I don't want to hear these guys that haven't watched the game telling me that we're not very good. Like it's understandable. Like it's football's like everyone's so passionate. And for, if you consider that the relatively niche nature of our content, ours and yours, I guess I was probably more so because of League One, League Two, like the majority of the people who are listening to this stuff, who, rather than watching their League Two team play or the Championship team play and then watch Match of the Day, who want to immerse themselves in all 3 leagues, football and their football club is going to be like incredibly important to most of them. Like maybe one of the most important things in their whole lives. So I guess there comes a responsibility with that to make sure that the coverage you're giving is thorough and is fair. And hopefully we always do that.
Yeah, amen. I'm sure I'm not really speaking to anybody in my comments here or subscribers who don't know what Not the Top 20 is, because it's been around for a long, long time. And I must say I must say thank you as well, George, because I'm a listener as well, and I'd like to think I'm pretty dialed in with the Championship. So often I do a little test. Do I agree with George and Ali? Are they saying anything different to me? What am I? Am I? If they're seeing it completely different to me, do I need to review what I'm saying? But particularly for League One and League Two, you're my kind of quick refresher when I'm in the gym on what's going on. So thank you for everything you do for
Oh, mate, thank
EFL.
you as well.
No, stop it. But for EFL coverage right the way through, and give a plug to the brilliant podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, League Two is easier when Oxford are in League Two. It takes more work now. Do come over and check out Not Top 20 if you haven't already. We do a Monday show, which is Championship, League One and League Two. All three videos are split on YouTube, or you can find them on any podcast platform as well. We have NTT20.com, which is a written offering where you can either be a free subscriber and get one piece a week, or you can be a paid subscriber for £7 a month. And plenty up on there too, looking to kind of provide more detailed, less clickbaity, more dedicated written coverage to the EFL, and it seems to be pretty popular. Hopefully you guys would like that. And over on YouTube, we also have the betting show on Thursdays, I should say as well, where we preview the weekend's action and give betting picks. So yeah, that's the offering.
Brilliant stuff, George. I'm sure you've got some data to pour over and some graphs to look at. So I'm going to say thank you for your time and keep up the brilliant work.
Thank you, mate. Thanks for having me, and you.